The next story that I'll go ahead and cover this one here. DeRay McKesson is an activist, and basically what had ended up happening to him, he was the victim of an attack. Attackers gained access to his cell phone account. Now, this wasn't an AT&T account, but ultimately what it came down to is his mobile service provider was social engineered, and they were able to gain access to the account. And I think this is one of the fundamental challenges that as a service provider, it's the balance between providing friendly customer service,
Right.
I've got a problem with my service, please help me fix it, versus the, basically providing good security. And, unquestionably, the mobile service provider made a mistake here. So let's put that on the table for the moment. Ultimately, what ended up happening is that the attackers were able to gain access to his phone number, and consequently gain access to his SMS messages. Now, he had what we're going to call two-factor authentication set up on apparently a couple of email accounts as well as his Twitter account. Ultimately, what it came down to is they were able to bypass the two-factor authentication and gain access to those accounts. Now, the question is, if you have two-factor authentication, how did this happen? Well, when we think about two-factor authentication, there are actually two things that are generally associated with two-factor authentication: something you have and something you know. Now, in this case, they're really kind of, I guess, using the notion of having access to SMS as one of those factors, and presumably your password being the password for access to the account being the other factor, something you have and something you know. Now, I think the real definition of two-factor really is something you physically have, a physical thing, not access to a particular account. But we'll let that slide for a moment here. Ultimately, what ends up happening in this particular case is, and I can't speak for the email accounts, but I think there are a lot of accounts that do this. I don't want to pick on Twitter in particular, but in this particular case, Twitter allows you to reset your password exclusively using SMS. So you have the option of having the password sent to you by email or having it sent to you by SMS. And Brian Krebs had pointed out some time ago, as a part of his book, Spam Nation, I think it was actually an addendum to the book, where he points out that your crown jewels are effectively access to your email. That is, almost any account you have anywhere, if somebody gets access to your email, they can get a password reset and have it sent through email. Well, this is a case where you get the choice between SMS or email. In this case, they got access to SMS, were able to reset his password, gain access to the Twitter account, and post, effectively, I guess, some abusive messages. I didn't actually see the messages. But ultimately, what it comes down to is, I think, yes, the mobile service provider made a mistake here. It's very difficult to balance when somebody comes in and says, I need help with my service. But this is a case where two-factor authentication is being misrepresented. It is not two-factor authentication unless you have to have both things in order to gain access to the account. So, and this is just a snapshot of what the Twitter reset is. You have the radio button to choose between a text code that is SMS or an email link, having a link sent through email to regain access to it. And they even give you the last two digits of the phone number so that you can verify that it's going to go to the phone number that you're expecting. So
the question I would have is, on your mobile device you can get like the RSA app for the RSA token. It's a soft, I guess, whatever. And I've never really looked into this myself. Does anybody know is that portable? Like, could you port that to another device, or is it actually physically tied to like the hardware ID of your device, that key?
I don't know for certain. My understanding is that it's actually tied to the device, but ultimately I think it's coming down to the isolation of the app itself is the boundary of security there. So I don't think it's actually proving that you have that mobile device. It's really basically proving that you have that app.
Okay.
But I am not aware of any situations where that's been compromised at this point, but it's it's certainly one of these things that ultimately is going to be put to the test in the long run.
Yeah, and then even if you had a smart device and had something else on there that could access what was happening with the RSA app, it could be shuttling off the numbers as they come out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just thinking out loud, but it seems like it's very hard unless you have one of those little physical tokens that have no access to anything else that just display a number. That's really the only 100% surefire way,
Yeah,
I guess.
the least convenient, but probably the most secure. In fact,
Right.
there was a time ago when, and this was many years ago, probably 15, well, maybe even 20 years ago, IBM started incorporating hardware into their laptops that basically provided some security features, as an isolated hardware component, but it added cost to the devices, and I think ultimately it wasn't competitive perhaps before its time. I think if somebody were to reintroduce something like that, particularly in a mobile device, that basically to have some hardware in the device that's dedicated to providing an authentication capability, maybe a little segment of the display that's dedicated to that function would potentially pay off, and particularly in high risk environments or high security environments, particularly the financial community where they're concerned about those types of things, very sensitive about their devices they purchase and that type of thing. So, we'll have to see as time goes on whether this type of thing it develops a lot better. And I know, there's work that's being done to help tie the actual registration process. The SIM card is very difficult to clone. You actually at least have to gain physical access to it at the very least. So that's a case where there's some good possibility in improving the verifying that you have, that you physically have something.